What?
so I can line up the sound. So, happy birthday.
Thank you.
How many years does this make?
73.
Wow. There's not many of us that can say 2 years ago we're healthier today than we were a couple of years ago. We both can kind of say that. So most of these podcasts, I start off talking about exercise and fitness. But when kind of thinking about this, something stood out to me about you that I kind of want to start with is your competitiveness. And I was kind of thinking, I bet if you interviewed all your grandkids, nieces and nephews, their kids, they kind of think of Uncle George as this very competitive guy. He really wanted to win that card game. But you have a great balance on how it's fun. You know, you're playing a little grandniece and you're playing war or whatever game, and you really, I know you might be letting them win, but as far as anybody knows in that room, you really want that to be an ace so you can get the win and you're excited about that. But a lot of people don't have that balance. You know, they're so competitive, they lose themselves. It's about winning, and you almost use it as a way to disarm people and make it fun. And I'm wondering where your competitiveness started. Was it always that way? You know, I'm assuming it started back with your brothers and sisters. And what are your thoughts?
Trying to remember. Yes, my grandmother loved cards. She'd play a game called Samber and Canasta and Solitaire. And Grammy always loved to win. She would laugh and but she was always gracious about it. And I think probably that just instilled me to want to win, but at the same time, I never cheated. I don't think I've ever cheated in my life in a card game or any game. You know, fair play. And I don't know where that came from, because fair play is just as important as winning.
Right. What about with sports? And because I'm guessing you and Tracy and
Always. Very competitive.
what? So we'll go into fitness. So
Very important.
I was thinking back, my friends and their parents growing up. I was trying to think of anybody's parents that I knew that exercised regularly. And I'm sure there's some that did that I just wasn't aware of. But for the most part, I don't, not the way you and Mom did. You know, I remember Grammy and Grampy, your parents, you know, walking consistently. Grampy Pelletier, I remember playing tennis with him. I feel pretty blessed to grow up in an environment where that was something that we did. If you could kind of talk to me, I'm interested in some of your earliest memories too of sports and things that influenced you, and kind of the environment you grew up in, and then how that kind of progressed through your life.
Well, my father would take Tracy, and this is probably my bias, because Tracy was older. It seemed like Dad worked with him more than with me. Mm-hmm. I would be there, but he would be catching for Tracy, teaching him to pitch, and I would be there. But eventually, by the time I was...
What's the age difference between the two of you?
2
years.
2 years, which to me was a big 2 years. But Tracy started weightlifting when he was probably 8.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I met maybe a little older. He might have been 10. But he had a good friend who became a bodybuilder before bodybuilders were popular.
Right.
And this guy was Bruce Chambers, and he was a legend in Portland, Maine. I mean, he was benching 360, you know, at 18.
Right.
So Tracy got a set of 150 pounds and so forth. So I just started lifting. And
So you're like 6 years old?
no,
Or-
8. He was 10. And so all my life I was, and he always did it properly. The right way to do things, keeping your balance, keeping your elbows strict if you're curling, that whole kind of thing. And so by the time I was in middle school, I worked out probably every day. Whether I was on a sports team or not, I always worked out. And Tracy did. And part of that competitiveness is I wanted to beat him. I never caught up to him. Tracy was always, he was more athletic. So for me, it was trying to achieve my brother's, He was a very good baseball player, very good basketball player. I could do it, and I was competitive, but never anywhere near as good as him. Now, that could be my memory being clouded. But,
right.
And then by the time I went to Maine Maritime Academy.
So before we get there, so did you notice benefits to the weightlifting?
Yeah,
I can't imagine that there was a lot of other of your friends at your age that were weightlifting at 8 years old. Or
Not
was
many,
that kind of
but-
a common thing?
Well, it might have been. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember my friends then. I would just come home in the after school and after whatever activity, and before watching TV at 7, I'd be up lifting upstairs in the barn.
Upstairs in the barn?
Well, we lived in a downtown Portland on Woodford Street, but it was the first Oakhurst Dairy in Maine. It's where it started. And we had an oak grove beside our house, and we had this huge barn. And I mean big. It had an upstairs, and the upstairs in this particular area was where the office was for Oakhurst Dairy.
Really?
And that's where we made it into a weight room. We had a punching bag.
Right.
So I've always worked out.
And was Tracy competitive with you? Were you guys?
I don't think I don't think he saw me as a competition.
Right.
He was older. And then by the time Tracy was a junior, he kind of left the home and went to live with my grandparents for his junior and senior year up in, he went to Halldale High in Augusta, near Augusta.
Well, why was that? What do you think?
Tracy and my father, Tracy was always very compliant, doing whatever my father wanted to him. And by the time he became a junior, my father really came down on him, and Tracy fought back. And I wasn't there, but I guess there was pretty close to blows. And I think Tracy kind of put my father where my father belonged.
Right.
And that's when the next thing I know, Tracy has moved to Farmingdale to live with my grandparents.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, well, it was a real shock.
I bet.
I think it was Dad was coming down on Jerry in a way that
Now, Jerry, so
Jerry had a
Jerry's
boy
how many years younger than you?
2,
Two. So
4 years younger.
So Tracy's a junior. You're about a freshman.
Yeah.
So she's
Yeah,
in-
Jerry had a boyfriend, and my father was very concerned about it, and rightfully so. Jerry was sneaking out of the house and that kind of thing. And I don't know why I wasn't there, but I wasn't home at the time it happened.
Right.
So
All right. So high school you played basketball.
mhm.
What other kind of sports did you do?
Primarily basketball. By the time I got to high school. I just figured that was a sport I loved.
What drew you to basketball at the time?
Probably Mike Porter.
So Georgia's how much? 2 or 3 years older than Tracy?
She's 4 years older than me.
Right. Okay. So basically, Grant, they had two.
Yeah. Georgia had gone to college.
So Georgia's in college, and so she's met Mike at this.
She's met Mike, and they're engaged, and so I really got into basketball with Mike's influence.
Yeah, I can see that. So what'd you like about the sport that once you were in it though yourself?
Well, I saw basketball as very challenging individually. I wasn't tall, so I worked on defense and trying to. I was a decent shooter. I never made the high school team. I came close twice. I made the final cut,
Right.
and then it came down to me and one other or two other guys, and I always was the guy who didn't make the team. And then all the team players kept saying to me, "You're so much better than,"
Right.
But I played intramural and did very well in that.
Right. Yeah. Do you have any regrets there? Do you think if you
No.
Was it? I don't think it was the lack of heart, putting in effort.
No, it was never that. I always performed well in the tryouts and all of that. And we had a 3-tier tryout where everybody, and then the second cut, and then the next cut, and then you're on the team for 2 weeks, and then there's the final cut.
Right.
And there was, there were 25 or 30 guys starting out. So it was very competitive.
Right.
Deering was a large school,
Right.
And at that time it was either baseball, football, and basketball. Those were the sports, basically.
Yeah.
They had swimming and skiing and other tangential sports, but those were the sports.
Right. Yeah, I remember trying out in middle school myself and just looking back, you can see the coach took the taller guys.
Yeah.
And I couldn't dribble. Yeah, I could dribble with my right hand when we're doing the tryouts, and it's like switch to your left. I'm like, oh, I've never even tried that skill.
I didn't teach you that.
I'm sure you mentioned it. I never developed it. All right, so May Maritime Academy.
Yeah. The basketball team there was different because we did cruises every year. We'd be away for 2.5 months out of a season. So we had what was called a basketball club, and I was on that. We play different schools around Farmington, smaller schools.
Right.
And that was I loved basketball and I loved it. But at Maine Maritime Academy, I continue weightlifting. We had a great weightlifting gym. And so I just weightlifted, and I remember using the punching bag. Trying to think what else that's basically what I did every day.
Right. And then, so timeline, you aim Duke's after Maine Maritime, right? Is it
Right.
pretty almost immediately after? Or?
No, I worked insurance for 6 months, and your mother and I got married, and in 1971 when we graduated, it was a very, very tumultuous time because of the Vietnam War, and shipping basically the industry changed. All the American companies were going foreign flags. There was nothing available. I remember 3 of us, Pete Connors, myself, and Mark Nutter, Mark Alley, he had to change his name because of family dynamics, went down to Massachusetts where the Coast Guard is the licensing body for the Merchant Marine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's unique is I had to have a commission in the Navy because all Maine Maritime Academy graduates had to have this commission. So I was a United States officer in the Navy.
Right.
And it made it kind of confusing. But we went down there and we were told by the commander of the facility that the only way we could get a job in 1971 is to put our name on a list and we might get hired as a wiper. Now, a wiper is the lowest level of a merchant marine person. That meant you wiped down the boilers as an engineer, and we had to pay $1,300 to get our name on the list. Now, what graduating,
Right.
So basically they were saying there's no jobs. So I remember, Ann, I was embarrassed about this because Ann got a job immediately as a dental hygienist.
Right.
It was making money, and I had nothing. So I applied to Groton, Connecticut for I can't remember what Groton, Connecticut is. It's a big facility. It's one of the biggest shipyards, and they build submarines. And I was flown down there, and I lost the job to a guy who had a master's degree in metallurgy. Came down to two of us,
Right.
but I didn't get it.
Right.
So I came home. Bethlehem Steel contacted me, and I was on a list, and I didn't get selected. They had an apprentice program. Even though I had a marine engineer's license, I didn't quite fit what Bethlehem Steel was looking for. But I almost got that job. I tried Bath Iron Works. They weren't hiring in 71. So I went maybe 4 months with nothing. And my father, at the church we were going to, talked to a gentleman who was the manager of Equitable Life. And I got a job with Equitable Life for 6 months. I was paid $600 a month, which was a lot of money then for beginning. And all I had to do was sell one policy of whole life insurance per month. I held that job for 4 months. I sold 4 policies. Now, your mother knows this now, but there was two friends of mine, Rick Blackburn and Artie Belcom, and they were high school friends of mine. And I got them both jobs at Equitable Life. We spent 4 hours a day at the University of Maine gym playing squash.
University of Southern Maine?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Playing squash.
Playing squash.
Not right.
Not racquetball. Racquetball really didn't start until around that time.
Right. Yeah. So then you decide to go to Duke.
Yes. And
And I'm guessing during this time it's reasonably stressful for you.
oh, very.
You're not exercising at all.
No, I was
You're
exercising
still
every
doing-
day.
you're still-
Every day.
So
I
you-
would use their gym and weight lift, and I always worked out.
But do you think that's I mean, I find for me if I don't exercise I feel off.
I feel horrible.
And it's
And in
stress
those times
reliever.
when I was sick with cancer, do you know if I still worked out?
We'll get to
That
that.
whole okay.
We'll get to
All right. So
But during that time, did you JT in the podcast with JT, he talked about how he never associate, and he's starting to do now. There's so many lessons you learn in exercising and working out, and how it relates to everything, and how you feel afterwards. Were you cognizant of at the time that
absolutely.
if I get this in, I'm a better person?
I
feel
felt better. It was a stress release, a big stress release, especially during those years, the 37 years as a minister, because people are difficult.
Yeah, we'll get to that too.
Okay.
And then the other thing JT remembers, and I'm jumping ahead here, but just to get to the point, he remembers coming up and working out with us at Gold's Gym. I don't remember that happening. It sounds familiar enough that I'm sure it did. And he was impressed at how you got after it in the gym. At that time when you were working out, and you were trying to bulk as...
Well, not necessarily, but I wanted to be physically fit. You know, I wasn't...
Were you getting after it in the hard... You know what I mean? Like...
I wasn't a bodybuilder.
But you were working out hard.
Yes,
wasn't...
because I believed in cross-training. And at that time, racquetball was my sport.
Well, not at before Duke, because you said it just...
No, but...
We haven't got that far. But
okay.
You're going into the gym and you're putting in... There's people that go to the gym and they're kind of just doing the motions. And then there's the people that go in and get a sweat on and... and
work
push
out. Yes,
to improve. And
so your mother and I packed our bags. It was end of July, August, so probably near August. What happened is I had to go to the University of Southern Maine and take full year psychology, sociology, a year of sociology, a year of philosophy, and there was one other: sociology, psychology, philosophy. Psychology, sociology. Well, there was another course in there, and I had to do it in 8 weeks, and I had to maintain a B average. Duke accepted me, but it said, we've never had someone who didn't have a traditional training to go into the ministry.
right.
And so we're accepting you, but you need these additional credits for you to be able to enter the program and do well.
Right.
And I did. So I spent literally 8 weeks not seeing Ann. And I did it at the University of Maine in Southern Maine. And I did. And we packed up everything, put it in a U-Haul truck, even put our Volkswagen into the back of the U-Haul. We got a big enough U-Haul that we could put it in. We went to a garage, they raised it up, and we drove it. And we literally had just enough money for the trip. No work, no job. We had an apartment to go to. In fact, we moved into that apartment. School was going to start the next week. We moved into that apartment, set up our water bill on the bed on the second floor, and as we're filling it, a pencil went off the bureau. And the manager the next day came up to check to make sure everything. I'm sure they dealt with students a lot.
Right.
You know, it was this big complex, brand new building. And he took one look. He says, "You can't have a waterbed in here." And we said, "Wait a minute, your mother. Where does it say this in the contract that we signed?" Well, the long and the short is they got an apartment at another complex on the ground floor, and they gave us our money back. And he showed us that they rewrote the contract saying no waterbeds. So we moved twice in that week. And then I started school at Duke. Now at Duke, basketball was still my primary sport. And Duke Divinity School had a basketball team that would play the lawyers and the doctors,
right,
and the engineers and the business, and I was on that team. We had a great team. I mean, it was really a good team. We were always very competitive, but we always lost to the lawyers. You know, and just a sideline, and one day I was playing basketball, and it was the first fall that I was there. Duke was not it was a good school, but North Carolina State with the big teams. Duke had a coach called Bucky Waters, and he was okay, but they didn't do well until Mike came, and that was after I graduated. But I'm playing basketball, and I go to get a drink of water, and one of the guys I was playing with came up to me and said, "You can't drink in that sink." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "That's for the black people." He didn't use that word.
Right.
And that was my first encounter with prejudice.
Right.
You know, I had never seen it before. I grew up in a home that every human being was accepted as a human being.
Yeah, it's different when you're in the South.
Very.
At that time. But
at that time,
different level too.
Very, very different. So that was eye-opener. But I played basketball, at least 2 hours a day.
Still working out.
5 weeks, 5 days a week, and still working out.
JD and I in college would work out. We do our workout and then go play basketball together. And we must look like the worst basketball player because you can't lift your arms because you just benched.
Yeah.
You know,
I would always weightlift after.
Right.
Because of that. Yeah, you can't get that.
There's
stretch.
no touch, nothing. But our one-on-one games were hilarious because it'd be to like 3 because we couldn't.
Now, one of the things that's very interesting to me is we were always told if you weightlift, you're going to hurt your basketball.
Right.
And how wrong that was.
Yeah,
in fact, it's the other way around.
Right.
I mean, you don't do anything without lifting.
Right. You look at, like right now, Jason Tatum. There's pictures online of him looking bigger. And as a Celtics fan, I'm excited. A little extra weight now. He
absolutely.
Those layups will.
Yeah, but back then, you were told if you weightlifted, the only thing that basketball players were allowed to do was run.
And I would say stretching and
yes,
and the specific weight types of lifting exercises are, bench press probably isn't helping you in basketball, but
it's not hurting it. In other words, Tracy, ahead of his time, would read a lot about weightlifting, and he would balance. Have you ever heard of isometrics?
Yeah, of course.
So we would do isometrics.
Yeah.
And we would do that for long periods of time. So we were learning. Get a little cramp.
Yeah, move around all you.
We were learning, or we were doing a balanced weightlifting.
Right.
We were. Gee, I wonder how. I mean, that really is amazing that we did that as young kids.
Right.
Always.
And so at some point, when do racket sports start happening?
Your mother, we were in East Boothbay, and I was still working out and doing my thing.
So you're jumping ahead.
Okay, this is a few years after graduating.
So I know what Duke ping pong at some point becomes a thing.
Ping pong. Ping pong was major.
Before that, did you play tennis or?
Never tennis.
No.
Ping pong. We always had a table. My mother would tell this story about her brother, Joe, who was an international ping pong player in the Navy. And her uncle, there were 2 of them, they were in the Navy, and they had done very well in ping pong. And so my mother was a good ping pong player, and so we always had a ping pong table.
Really?
Always. In that big house on Whifford Street, we had a ping pong table down in the basement, and we would go at it.
You and Tracy?
Tracy, my mother, the neighborhood kids.
Jerry?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Jerry wasn't, I don't remember Jerry being that good, but yes, Jerry. The home we lived in was the home where, out in the basketball court up at the top of with the barn, entry into the barn, we had a basketball. We'd have 15, 20 kids there playing basketball. It was a neighborhood hangout. We'd have At night, most people would play games like hide and seek or something. We would play with acorns in the fall, and if you hit someone with an acorn, we were stupid. Ask Jerry about that. Oh, we would.
So at Duke, ping pong became
a
borderline obsession. It sounds
well,
like.
in the divinity school, we had a community room, a large one. And we set up, there was a ping pong table and a pool table. So I divided between playing pool and ping pong. Now, I'm talking maybe an hour,
Right.
a day, But there was a Japanese gentleman, Chung, who was a mathematics major for PhD. And his mother trained the Chinese Olympics team. Now, this guy was good. And I was a decent ping pong player. There were very few at the divinity school that could beat me on a regular basis. Chung would put a paddle on one end of the table, let's say where I am. He'd put a paddle on this corner and a paddle on that corner. And the only way he could beat me is if he hit the paddle. Now I'm talking, he's 20 feet away from the table. He's right up like you.
Right.
And I might get 3 points.
It's interesting. Racket sports is one of those. If I go out and shoot basketball, I kind of have an idea of where I am in the food chain of basketball. And you'll get people to say, "Oh, I'm a really good tennis player," and I'll go out and play them, and it's like they're not even close to my level, and I'm aware of how far behind I am from an elite. Ping pong's another one of those where
Absolutely.
Pools, a sport like that where there just isn't this. They don't know where they really fit in the food chain. I'm guessing you're thinking you're a pretty good ping pong player, then you meet this guy,
and then you meet this guy. It was night and day. The closest I ever got to him playing, I think I got 5 points off him once.
Right. Yeah, we'll get to this in a bit, but I learned that pretty quickly in racquetball playing with you one time. But so after Duke, now you're into your career.
Yes.
And now where is exercise? You're keeping exercise going, obviously.
Right. I went to Lisbon first for 3 years, and I met a guy there, Bob McKay. And Bob's wife, it so happened, Jan, went to school with Ann at Westbrook College then, which is UNE now. And we became very good friends. And Bob was he was a business teacher at Lisbon High School, and also the basketball coach for the girls and the baseball coach for the girls. And he played tennis, and we just started playing tennis and so forth. And I fell in love with the game. Bob and I would go at it. I always thought I was a better tennis player than Bob, but he would always end up winning.
If I remember correct, Bob was the master of trick shots.
At master of trick shot, he had a lob that literally would spin, hit in, and bounce out of the court,
right,
over the fence. And he was a human backboard. He was very, very quick. He was only 6'1", but had 6 feet, but had very long arms. And he just would run down everything.
And I've always, in trying to teach my daughters tennis, I almost wish I'd taught them ping pong first.
Yes.
I think in my head I was thinking the weight of a tennis ball, and in tennis you don't use your wrist, but that touch for them to develop a drop shot.
And that's why that's why the game has changed. Tennis players, when they're young, have a little short racket, almost the size of a ping pong paddle.
Right.
Obviously it's bigger, but because of that very reason.
Right.
And yeah, ping pong was probably the basis of why I was very good at racket sports.
Right. Right.
And I learned ping pong when I was 6. I mean, we always had a table.
Because a ping pong ball is so light, you have to develop that kind of feel of the ball,
touch,
when it's hitting your paddle, and what to do with it,
and the control, everything. I agree.
and the feel just works for everything. And pickleball, I'm guessing, probably would be a similar
Yeah.
trajectory, even though the ball in ping pong, you get the ball to do so much movement.
Yes.
And it's such an extreme level.
Oh, extreme.
Right.
And it also is a mental game, because in racket sports, if someone's beating you, you don't keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
You have to say, okay, this isn't working. What can I now do?
Right.
You know, to correct, to get it back so I'm in control of the point.
What a great analogy for life too in general. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
And that's JT and I talked about this. The analogies to life that you learn through sport, which I feel for kids that don't grow up in kind of
In an environment.
Right. Yeah. So
I'm at East Boothbay. So that's 1980, 79, 70, 78. I went to East Boothbay.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day, Mom came home from the Y. I was going to the Y and weightlifting and stuff like that. And she said, I learned a new sport, racquetball. Would you play with me? And I said, okay, I'll try. And your mother was a very good racquetball player,
right.
for meaning at that time. And we played one day, and I fell in love with it.
Did Mom grow up playing? So Grampy played tennis.
Yeah, your mother knew how to play tennis. Yes, your mother was very athletic.
Right. Yeah.
But not. Her big thing was swimming.
Right.
And she did very well in high school swimming. I remember one day I saw this box that she had, and she showed me, and she had gold medals and medals from AAU swimming.
Right.
And,
right.
You know, so.
Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah, I got to tell you this.
Go ahead.
Competitive. We're at the, I don't know why, in Waterville at Colby College's swimming pool. It's an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And we're going, I says, let's race. Did I ever tell you this?
Yeah, but tell it again.
We dove in, and I'm swimming as fast as I can. I get to the end of the pool, and I get out, and I can't find your mother. And I'm getting sick. So I go into the excuse me, into the restroom and throw up. Came back and says, where were you? She said, I swam down the pool. Didn't know where you were. I saw you swimming, so I swam back, and then I think she won.
Yeah.
But
so she shows you racquetball.
She showed me racquetball, and I just loved it.
What about racquetball?
Again, it's a racket sport, and I had played squash and liked squash. Although squash is a different tempo of a game. You know, you think it's fast. It is fast, but it's not the running like racquetball. It's the stroke is longer, the stroke, and the ball moves slower. Where racquetball is a very quick game, and I just started, and it really fed my competitive juices. Within a year, I was playing the top players in Boothbay, Jay Krause and Lewis. What was his name? Roy Lewis. You know, I mean, I really became competitive at East Boothbay. And there was then a teacher at Southport, Terry McFeetris, who we were both very similar size. In fact, sometimes people would mistake one of us for the other. Mm-hmm. I mean, and Terry and I really became good friends and really played. We tried to play these 3 times a week, and we wouldn't stop. I mean, we'd be sweating, you know, just I mean, it really got my competitive juices going. I loved racquetball.
I was the angles of that sport. For me, like everything I knew about tennis was opposite. Where the ball was coming from, but the placement that you could hit it just easy and put it in a spot where I didn't know what to do with the ball.
Oh, absolutely.
It was amazing that the tiers of that. And,
Yeah.
I think that when you and I played a match and you told me I wouldn't win a point, I think you might have even let me win a point towards the end. Because I didn't even realize scoring wise I had to win a point and then another point on a serve to actually get a point. So it was a different. I realized what tier I belonged on at that point pretty quickly.
You would have been a very good racquetball player.
Right. It just takes the
The
learning, the
dedication,
strategy,
the practice. You know, one of the things about racquetball that I liked is I'm a closet introvert, and I would go into that gym, into that racquetball court, and be there an hour, and I would stand on one, let's say the backhand side of the wall down, and I'd hit a shot. And my goal was to stay there at least 5 minutes, not missing, just hitting again and again. Repetitive motion.
Was that the first sport? Maybe that's basketball that you were obsessive about. You know,
Even more than basketball.
Right.
You know, I remember I was in maybe between my sophomore and junior year, I wanted to be a ref. And you had to take a course at the Y and to ref basketball games. And I would study the manual on the rules,
right.
you know, night after night to really because you have to be quick with the rules. And I became a ref at the Y.
Now I do remember in one of my first kind of, I'm thinking sports memories, in Booth Bay, Rotary basketball. And I think it might be the first sporting event that I remember going to. And I believe Mom was taking me, and we just, somehow I knew Dad was playing, and I remember seeing the court, and there's people, and I seem to remember you taking a deep shot, like a corner three. I don't know whether it went in or not, but that kind of memory sticks in my head that,
Yeah, I remember.
you know, looking up at Dad, like, wow, Dad's playing this, and it seemed like a pretty big deal. Obviously, my little mind.
Yeah, we
didn't
played
know.
the high school senior team.
Oh, did you really? The Rotary.
Rotary men played the
Yeah.
high school.
I'm guessing you were
Varsity.
playing a lot of basketball at this time. It was just kind of.
Oh, I was still
Oh,
playing.
were you?
Yeah. But eventually it became all, because I'd still play basketball. I always, like Mike, your uncle, I always kept a basketball in the car.
Right.
And so if I was somewhere, a meeting or something, and afterwards I could just go out and shoot around. It was a distressor for me.
Right.
You know,
And I've, something about, especially playing in a game, there's, it's a physical sport. There's a certain amount of kind of you're pushing and elbowing and just getting in there, and then there's also just shooting around, which there's so many different levels that, and the little bit of strategy that happens in basketball.
and
love.
you're developing a skill,
Right.
which is rewarding.
Right.
But also you're using your body the way it's intended to be used. You
Yeah.
know?
And you can just lose yourself in a jump, foul shots. You can just.
I would do
Well-
foul shots for 20, 30 minutes, just standing there. And I got to the point where in most courts, if the rim was correct, you can shoot it so it spins, comes back to you, and you
Right,
just keep
right.
shooting.
Yeah.
You know, I love doing that.
At the University of Maine, to get into a game would open up, shooting foul shots, first 5 guys that make their foul shots get on the team. So I was like, I gotta get good at foul shots.
Yes.
But then it ended up becoming an obsession. Like, if my shot doesn't feel right, I can go to the foul line, take 2 or 3 shots.
And find it.
And you, it's amazing how you can just lose yourself and go back to that. Okay, my 3 bounces, relax the knees, you know, whatever your
And
rhythm.
the endorphins of there were, I remember one particular game at Maine Maritime Academy. And I literally knew anything I shot, it was going in. I didn't miss.
Right.
I mean, you just feel it. Now that very seldom happens, but
Right.
when you get it, that becomes the goal. And I always will remember that. I mean, I literally could not miss. I might have made 15 points, 5 baskets, but in a quarter. But I mean, I knew if I got the ball and I was fed, I'd make it.
I remember remembering Mike Porter, him telling me at one point he'll go to a court and he'll watch guys shooting around. And he said people like to take the shot that they want to take. It's not really the best shot. He's like, and then I get in the game and I let them have that shot because that's usually not a good shot. They can have that shot all day long. And that was one of those early kind of thinking about the mental aspect of the game. And not just basketball, like applying to everything. Like it kind of opened the world. And it's probably about the same time where my friends were getting taller than I was. And I had to still stay competitive, I had to start getting better at the mental aspect of the game. So then we moved to Old Town.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you must have felt like you were in heaven finding the racquetball club.
Yes.
And the university courts.
Yes, both.
So I mean, you had
both.
racquetball everywhere.
Dave Ames was the director of intramurals at, and he also came to the Old Town Church. So I would go to the university and play Dave, and then I would go to Gold's Gym.
Which wasn't Gold's at the time. It was
it was called the Racquetball Club.
Right.
One of the unique things about that Racquetball Club, the 11 courts were great. The pros would come, the world pros. I mean, I saw Marty Hogan and Garnett and the best players, Heather Mackay. I mean, the best racquetball players in the world would show up there.
It makes me think of, there's an interesting story that Joe Rogan has told on his podcast about he was in Boston and there was a guy, he was at the gym, he was like a trainer at the gym, and there was a guy that was a pro racquetball player. He was a young guy, like 18. But there was just no career as being a pro. You could get sponsorships, and a couple $100 here or there, but you couldn't make a career. It's like, and he tried to change it to tennis, convert over to tennis, because Rogan talks about how, unfortunately, that's the sport you happen to be so talented in that just doesn't have the financial backing.
Yeah, well, and the reason was, literally, they tried to put it on television, and television just couldn't capture it.
Yeah,
it's too fast. So you never could get that jump into it.
And I don't think like when you and I played that time, and you're hitting an easy shot down the line, and because it's so tight to the wall, and where it bounces, like everything about, but that doesn't, anybody watching that wouldn't know that was a very skilled shot. And if I returned to how skilled that return would be, it just doesn't, unlike tennis where you see a guy sprint the distance and hit the ball, you have a concept, it doesn't look that hard.
Yeah, racquetball just didn't translate into cameras.
Right.
And so I remember when I first got there, I was asked to be on a team. We would play at night, and there were 13 teams, and each team had 5 players. And you had to start out, I was a fifth player. And within a month, I was the number 1 player. Because it was like a ladder within your team.
Right.
And so I was the number 1 player. And I stayed as a number 1 player for years, I think probably 10, 15 years. And then over that time, racquetball started waning. You didn't have as many players and you couldn't keep the teams. And so I very quickly because of my work ethic of working out, practicing, still cross-training, weightlifting, and playing the better players, I got up to be one of the better players. Not the best.
Right.
You know, in fact, the best one broke my nose. That was an experience. But I really loved the game of racquetball because it challenged the mental capacity, the effort capacity. It released stress.
But
So
yeah. And you kept that going.
for years.
Yeah. And then so let's talk about the cancer. So you kept working out during cancer. So I listened to, we had a speaker, former NFL player at work, and he talked about how he worked out all the way through cancer and he felt that actually he got through his treatment quicker. And even before that, which I think COVID has kind of brought this up, I think a lot, is just if you're healthier going in to getting anything, and life throws a curve at you, if your body's prepped in a good place, you're gonna have a better chance coming out the other side.
Absolutely.
So I mean, your life of being physically fit probably saved your life.
I have absolutely no doubt.
Right.
Both physically, and I think it goes hand in hand mentally.
Right.
You know, I if I sat and did nothing, I knew I'd die.
Right.
And that first go around in, when was it? 2008, I think. Wasn't it around then when I first had it?
It sounds about
No, that's 2008. It was before I graduated. I retired in 2011. So around that time is when I was diagnosed. And that first few chemo treatments, I was really, really sick.
Right.
But by going to the gym, I was telling myself, I'm going to get through this. You know, and even though I lost a lot of strength and a lot of weight, I was still keeping my body functioning.
Right.
The hardest part was not wanting to eat. That was difficult because I had no strength and no energy.
Right.
But I just forced myself, and I did all through that. I always worked out.
I can't even imagine. So,
Still played racquetball.
right. There's, and I hadn't thought about this, but so my favorite workouts are the ones where I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I don't want it. Like, I don't want to do it today. And I go and do it. It's like, and I really feel like I achieved something. Was that happening during the camp?
Absolutely.
Like
I just forced myself.
but did you let afterwards, was it like, or you were just so miserable?
No, yes. I did feel better afterwards. I felt more alive, you know.
You were fighting.
Yeah.
And controlling what you could control.
Right. And, you know, and what was difficult is I had several things going on. I had the sarcoidosis, which is that lung disorder that, I mean, I guess it just because I had fluid in my lungs, it was harder to breathe. And so the more I worked out, the more my body got stressed. But I knew I had to do it to keep going. And then I'm dealing with the cancer. But I just knew I had to do that. That's probably why I'm still here.
Right. Absolutely. Huh. All right. Let's move on. So something I've been interested in. I feel like I have. Socially, I'm fine with people, but I think I have antisocial kind of tendencies. You know, I'm fine being around people. Logan and I joke about being allergic to small talk.
You are defining me.
Well, that's what I'm saying, and I see a lot of that in you. It's interesting.
Do you see me on the phone?
What do you mean?
I don't want to stay on the phone.
Right.
I just can't small talk.
Right.
And it drives me crazy. The other day, Natalie called.
Mm-hmm.
Your mother was on the phone an hour and a half.
Well, I call mom and I get an hour and a half talking to mom.
But
I don't know if I call that small talk. I'm talking more just the, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm great.
The weather's fine.
Right. The just, and it's just polite conversation. I get it. But I don't have a need for that. And like at family get-togethers, you're fine going and sitting and reading your book or doing whatever. And if somebody's going to talk to you, but it's, some people are natural, like that's their environment, like that they love that, right? They love that, going and being mom, talking to everybody and get to know everybody and including everybody, and it's just not in my DNA.
It's not in my DNA. I'm a closet introvert.
But it's interesting. So it's interesting to me that you choose a career where you have to do that. As a minister, that's community building is by definition which is kind of opposite to your personality, I think.
Now, do you know Myers-Briggs?
Yeah.
Okay. If you take Myers-Briggs and put it to ministers, the worst kind of minister is the extrovert.
Why would you say that? Why?
Well, now, this is a lot of research into this and everything. They're manipulators. Now, if the goal is success and making a lot of money and all that kind of stuff, but what happens to those ministers usually?
What?
They fail miserably because they're hypocrites.
Right.
The ministers that really do ministry are usually closer to introverts than extroverts. Because we're trying to be real. We're not faking it. Now, there's studies that go into this. Oftentimes, those who are really extroverts are sociopaths.
Right, extreme of that.
They're extreme. You need a balance. And so my balance came, I loved it. I love to preach, which is the most in front of people. But afterwards, do you remember me when I came home after preaching?
You're wiped out.
Totally wiped out. I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't even want to talk to your mother, for a couple of hours. So
I won't get into so many things, but the preaching part, was it the studying?
All of it.
And something I've always appreciated, I think a lot of people, I think why you were as good at what you did as you are, I think a lot of ministers, this is how it is, how, look at me, follow me, I'm doing it right.
That's the extrovert.
And right. And you were, like one of my favorite sermons the one you did in Damascus, where you're talking about you on the road and honking the horn. It's my road, and you were always
authentic
and willing to share your warts, and showing I'm not perfect. I'm on this path trying to learn. It's a great way of leading by example. But did you like the studying aspect of it? Was that?
I absolutely loved it. My method took, people see me and they think, well, you just stand up there and talk. Well, that standing up there and talking took maybe 15 to 20 hours preparation. You first have to study it, research it, check it. It's called doing an exegesis of that passage to make sure that I'm not saying what I want to say, I'm saying what it says, and then translating that to people. And that takes a lot of time. And so basically I would memorize my research and and put down what I knew I was supposed to say. and get it as close as I could. But the end product was never what I thought it was going to be.
Right.
And that's the Holy Spirit. I knew it enough that God or the Spirit could speak through me too. So I loved it.
Yeah. And then talking about the small talk aspect, right? So I think of Burley. It's Burley Shivels. You had to know him at a different level than I did, but I kind of think of him, his genuine happiness for just life.
And
Happy day. Like I hope someday to be at a point where I can just see the world through those and
that he was the most non-judgmental person
right.
I ever knew.
Right. But I could also see how that just could be as irritating as can be. You're having to just deal, not the happiness, but the nonstop just wanting to just, and you have a church full of people that want to small talk and want to just
Needy people.
Right. And do you think that were you the same? We obviously change over time, but the church, I'm sure, changed you. You're in having to deal with that. Did it make you more of an introvert towards the end?
Yes. And how I know that is when I got sick, I realized it took so much energy to live that I became less patient with people.
Right.
And there were several times that literally, if I didn't excuse myself, I would have blown up.
Right.
I had to go into the office and, my secretary, do you remember Edith?
Somewhat.
A very, very nice person, but a very needy person. And she could drive me crazy. And I literally had to just close the door and just get away, And a lot of people were getting on my nerves. That's why I knew, I remember telling your mother in 2011, I've got to retire.
Right.
My goal was a little longer, but I just couldn't do it anymore. And I was close to burnout as you could get.
Do you think that was a sickness, though, as much
Combination of both.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if you hadn't got sick, maybe that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I might have, yes, I agree fully. That's true. Because I was so sick. I mean, I had so many things going on. And what's interesting, and this ties in, it was all psychosomatic. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia is an autoimmune disease. Sarcoidosis is an autoimmune disease. Pulmonary embolisms happen because of stress. Think of it. I was in trouble, and I think it is, even though I had those stress releases of weightlifting and so forth, I would bury things. My deeper feelings. I would just bury them, and you can't. So keep working out. You got to let them out, but boy.
Well, at some point, you JT talked about this briefly in his, in the deployment. If you step back and think about the big picture and everything, it could be too overwhelming. So you kind of almost have to put your nose down and just get through it.
Well, think about COVID right now and how many families have been destroyed because of it.
Oh, okay.
The stress of staying in for a year. We were closed down, and if it wasn't for sports, your mother and I would go out on that court and the worst situations, the wind blowing, you know what I mean, and just play because we knew we had to.
Pickleball.
Pickleball.
Yeah. Yes. What a great sport. I mean, you guys hit it kind of right with that. Because
Yes.
it gained in popularity
yeah.
just as you're starting to get.
What's interesting is your mother and I were going to be golfers.
Right.
You know, you remember the anniversary present and put those down and so.
I can't see you as a golfer.
Well, we went to what's the name of the community? Well, just outside of Jefferson, where there's a nice course.
Right.
And we're there, and I remember we arrived and get there. We put down the ball, and the fairway goes parallel to the road. And I hit a shot, and it hooks and goes off, and it's around, you know, in the rough, and you know. So your mother's up there, and the first ball goes there across the road. The next ball almost hits a car coming down the road. The next ball dribbled, and then she hit one. And we're looking at each other and saying, okay. So we get to the third fairway, which is up dog leg to the right. And how do we get a ball to go up? You know, you think it's simple. You know, and so we're there and we're trying, it took us about 15 shots to get up the hill. So it became, we didn't have any lessons.
Right.
And so we both looked at each other and said, this isn't working. You know, it wasn't doing anything for us. Yeah. So how did pickleball start? Oh, again, Ann goes to the Y and plays this game. And she says, came home and said, you got to try this. You're going to love it. And I said, pickleball. And in my brain, I remember back in high school, we had these balls that were bigger than a medicine ball. Mm-hmm. And you had them under your chest and you walked like this and then you would kick them. And it was called crab ball. And I'm thinking, is that pickleball? But I tried it and loved it, and we became fanatic with the game.
Are you two pretty competitive?
Very.
So like if you went out and played 10 games against mom, 50-50, 60-40?
Depends on the day.
So, yeah, I mean, what?
It really does. Your mother, her strengths are mental and backhand.
Right, I've seen the backhand.
If you hit anything near her backhand, she'll kill it if she's on.
Right.
You know, but I mean, and there's no return because she hits extreme. I mean, there's some games she's unbelievable. I mean, you can't stop it.
Right.
I'm a little bit faster than her, meaning if we're at the kitchen line and balls are coming at us, I have more options than she does. Probably because I'm taller and a male. No, that's not true because women are just as good. It's an equalizing sport. There's no advantage of being a man in pickleball.
Right.
None. Completely.
Yeah, even power. I mean,
you
can snap a shot,
but in pickleball, power is not an answer.
Right, exactly.
You know, if somebody hits a tennis shot and slams it, you just put your racket and you let the momentum take it and drop it.
Right.
I mean, so power doesn't really play into it.
Right.
So yeah, so I would say actually your mother wins most of our one-on-one games.
That kitchen sink just is the most frustrating thing.
Yeah, it is.
Because from tennis, I want to go to the net.
You want to go in.
I want that advantage. Wait a sec, I can't go further.
You can't. So yeah, we're very competitive.
That's great. Okay, so then one other topic I kind of want to get to is fatherhood, and I'm interested to see your thoughts on how you were raised, how your parents kind of raised you, and the family dynamics a little bit, and then how that influenced you in kind of choices you made as a father.
All right, good question. My mother and father. My father came from an abusive home. His dad, and it's very interesting. because my grandfather on my father's side had a long history of abuses done to him. When he was 6 years old, he and his older brother, see, Tom was 2 years older than him, were sent from England to Canada in World War I to pick potatoes for the war effort. And just imagine that. You know, we haven't been able to find out why. Obviously, they were very poor, and your mother found out there were over 30,000 young boys sent from England at that time. And by the time my grandfather made it, he ran away, is the story, and he went to Portland and got a job with my grandmother's father, working for the railroad in Portland. And so through all of that, Grampy was a hard man, but a very loving man too. And he used to call me his good for nothing. Yeah, good for nothing, Georgie. You know, but I always interpreted that as love. And he motivated me a lot. So my father was a man, being British and from a British home, to not show affection. You know, we were not a hugging family.
Which is interesting you say that, because one of my fondest memories of Grampy as a kid, we'd get to their house in Scarborough, and he'd give a bear hug and pick us up. You know,
But he never
grandkids.
would hug me.
Right.
You know,
That's interesting.
probably because he had learned by then that grandfathers are supposed to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And your grandfather was a very intellectual man. You know, and my mother grew up in a very large French home where she had 6 brothers and 5 sisters. You know, one of the sisters died. There were 12, and then it became 11. My mother was very affectionate and very loving. And so my mother basically raised us, where my father was always off with business, and he was very active in politics, and you know, so he was going to the state house all the time as a state senator. You know, so my father's role, my mother's favorite argument was when I wasn't acting out according to what she thought was the right way. I was a good kid. I didn't get into trouble and things like that. But she would say, when your father gets home, you'll get a licking.
Right.
So I always subconsciously feared when Dad would come home, because Jerry and I would be in trouble. It was always Jerry and I. So that influence on me was when Ann and your mother and I became parents. We had done a lot of talking about it, and I told her I was not going to be the disciplinarian. And I realized I might have taken that too far, because she became the disciplinarian. Would you agree with that?
I feel like you guys had a decent balance.
Well, we tried to, but you see, your family issues dominate. You might say, I'm going to try to get out of it, but, you know, like, I would be the first to let you off your punishment.
Right.
You know, because I wanted to love you, but your mother kept saying to me, but by loving them, you also have to discipline. And
Right.
she's right.
Right.
You know, so I guess we did have a good balance, but it was hard.
So like you said, there was a you were definitely the softer. Discipline wise, if there was a spanking or if we really deserved it, you were the more disciplined one. But following through, that was more mom.
Right.
For sure.
And that's why, because I always remembered fearing my father, and I didn't want you kids to fear me.
Right. No, and there was definitely none of that.
Yeah.
But I think I think that balance. I think the two of you struck a good balance there, because there are times where it's like you need to be grounded for a week, and then there's time for compassion too. You know.
And it didn't work with Sam.
It's interesting how different we all are and how we
Yeah.
respond to different stimuli, and yeah. And you've said to me a couple times, and I know Grampy Pelletier said this to Mom, that you don't feel that you were a good father, which I mean, everybody I run into, I love your dad. How's your dad doing? I mean, from childhood, you know, you were one of the favorites of all my friends' parents. What do you think that? Where do you think that you have regrets, I guess, or what you would do differently?
It probably has more to do with Sam. I feel I failed Sam somehow. And I don't know why. Sam's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like Josh and I are more easy to read.
Sam's impossible to read. I mean, one day we're playing cards, and we were Jackie and David. And no, we were playing cribbage. And I made a mistake. The way our cribbage board goes, it goes this way and then comes back. And so if you're on this side and the pegs are in the middle over here, your tendency is to forget the color and I had moved him. And he just came down on me, and I just said, and walked out.
Right.
You know, I've never had to do that before with anybody in my life.
Right.
You know, you just get tired of his. I don't know what it is. He just.
Yeah, if there's one thing I would love to relay to Sam, life's too short to be upset about small
Nothing.
things. Right. And I get that there's frustration and other things have happened, and you know, and
Yeah. So, why I feel I wasn't a good father, I guess that's a normal thing. You know, I
didn't know.
I guess it's because I felt I wasn't there enough with you.
That was the only thing I could guess that you thought.
Yeah, you know, because my job was in the way I approached my job. It's like it had to come first.
Right.
And I put my family second, and that bothers me.
But I don't think I felt that at all.
Okay.
Because coming home from school, you were there. Where the church was right next door, you were always there. You know, we always had our dinners together, and we.
Yeah, that's true.
There wasn't a lot of dad's gone for instance, and it's interesting because Jarrett, his father, was a merchant marine, a path that you easily, if you found a job out of school, maybe you don't go down the path
I would have been gone. Oh, absolutely.
and maybe you stay on that path and it never goes.
Yeah, and I was a good engineer.
Right.
I remember Pete Connors and I, when we did our internship for 6 months, we were called before the assembly and awarded for outstanding cadet shipping.
Right.
And what we did is the third engineer was drunk at 3 a.m, and we're going up the Mississippi, which is a very dangerous place. And he's drunk, and the boilers, 2 of the tubes blew up in the boiler. Now, what happens is if you don't shut that engine down quickly, you can lose your ship. And both of us, cadet shipping, and we knew exactly what to do. I remember Pete's running this way, and I'm running this way, and I'm closing down these valves, and he's closing it, and we saved the ship and got commended for it. So I was a good engineer. I knew what I was doing. I understood. Don't remember a thing about it now.
Right. Yeah.
But
But I think of Jarrett growing up with his dad Mike, who's a very loving. And,
oh yeah.
But he was gone 3 months,
3 months,
6 months, whatever. And I know how hard that was on Jarrett to
On
grow
Libby.
up like that. To Libby, right? The family, and it'd be great to have 6 months of just your dad, but you're in school, you're doing your things. Yeah. So I mean, in comparison, there,
Yeah.
you were always there. So I don't. Yeah, I don't feel like anything was missing in my childhood, and I feel like I've learned a lot as a parent. As my role model, I think I've done pretty well using your guidance.
And you've done well with Kaylin and Logan.
Yeah, and we all
And Jeff and Melissa.
There's no book to this stuff. There
There isn't,
winging it.
and that's the hard part because you literally have to go through it.
Right.
But I give a lot of the credit to your mother, who forced me to sit down and talk about how we were going to parent. See, I would have let it just happen, And your mother is very capable that way. She has a big need to do things right.
What kind of things would you talk about? Like what kind of decisions?
How do we punish? To not punish out of anger.
Right.
And that was pretty easy with you and Josh, but with Sam it was very hard.
We must have been a handful, but my girls are so. I think more because they're girls. Or younger girls are looking to please, and we were wild boys.
I would use the word active.
Right.
And I knew both of you had good friends. Even though sometimes we were concerned about Chris because of his home environment, but we knew basically he was a good kid. Stevens.
Oh, right.
And
it's right.
And John was a good kid.
I remember, and this was in high school, John Wibby, who was a friend of mine, I grew up kind of doing all right. His family came to the Stillwater Church at some point, and his mother was pretty, embarrassed at how his kids were acting up. And somebody in the church said, "Don't worry, they're not as bad as the Curtis boys."
But you weren't bad. Bad is stealing and abusing other people, and kids need to be kids.
Yeah, I was probably a little rough on Jaw. I know I was, as a big brother. I wish I was more aware of what bullying was, and and kind of a little easier on him. He was my Jerry, Yeah. It was. I do think, and also, and this kind of ties into education, and I am kind of interested in your thoughts on this a little bit. Like schooling, elementary school till middle school, maybe even beyond, just wasn't a good fit for. I feel like a young boy. I was smart enough to be able to get through and do the things I needed to do, but to sit in a classroom and pay attention was just. Nowadays they call it ADD, and I don't know where I would have fallen on that spectrum, but paying attention and just wasn't sitting in a church pew for half hour or whatever it was. I was such an active, my energy, go, my mind's, to just sit and focus and pay attention. I think schools kind of fail young boys in a lot of ways in that, but I don't know the solution either. And it wasn't till probably somewhere in the middle of high school where my body settled down enough where I could mature enough to start focusing and I need to start really paying attention. Were you similar that way as a child, or?
In the first grade, my first grade teacher tied me in the seat with rope because I wanted to go around and explore.
Right.
So the ADA probably was me. By the time I was in the 7th grade, I was in the next to the lowest division. And yet my IQ said that I was one of the smartest kids in the school. So I was constantly taking IQ tests because they couldn't figure out why I was doing so poorly in school.
Right.
And yet I had an intelligence that said I should be doing very well. And it was probably what you were saying. I couldn't focus. I was a poor reader. I hated reading.
Right.
And so we were doing a mechanical IQ test that all students would take. For example, it would show a gear going this way, and a gear going this way, and a gear going, in which direction would it go? You know, if you had pulleys doing this and I remember the guidance counselor who became a good friend, Nelson Nielsen, kept stopping and looking at me, and I'm thinking, does he think I'm cheating? What's going on? And you know, and this is a long test. And he called me into the office afterwards, and he showed me I got one wrong out of this IQ test on engineering. And he said, and yet you're in the next to the lowest division. What's going on here? So he gave me a battery of tests. And so I'm going into the 9th grade, and I was going to be in the general courses. There were 3 general, business, and then college.
Right.
And I was put in the lowest division of the college. And I still got my normal rank card, which was a couple of B's, mostly C's, and a D. I got a D in Latin. I hated Latin. Hated it. The teacher was horrible. And I didn't memorize. I didn't want to memorize.
Right. Right.
You know, I just, you know, and so from then on, in high school, B's and C's. Let's see. So when asked what schools to go to, my junior year, Nelson took 8 kids with him to see Maine Maritime Academy. And we walked around and toured it. And not that I was overwhelmed with it, but I thought, well, that would be a possibility to apply. Now, my SATs, you know, I got 580 in math and maybe 420 in English.
Mm-hmm.
But then SATs were really accurate, but you had no way to study.
Right.
You didn't study for them.
Right. Right.
So that was college level. I could have gotten the University of Maine or, you know, anywhere. And SATs were basically what it was. And I got accepted at Maine Maritime again. I remember Jerry said, "You're not going to get in. You're not going to get in. You're a dummy." And she's holding the letter, and I opened it, and I got in. You know, so to answer your question, yes, I probably was very much like you.
Right.
In other words, I had the aptitude.
Right.
But I didn't, you know, schools weren't equipped to teach me properly.
Right.
And they probably still aren't.
Right. Yeah, I look back and if I, you know, I think back if I applied myself more, you know, I tell the girls, you know, even though this class doesn't feel important, it's snowballing into, you know, you do well in this class, and then later on, when you're writing essays later on, because you were so proficient here. And I think back, you know, if I was better in grammar earlier on, but it's like, it wasn't going to happen.
Now, you know, and it's very interesting to show that I had the aptitude. when I started at Duke, everything was writing. I mean, everything.
Right.
The longest paper I ever wrote was a 5-page essay on economics at the Maritime Academy. I mean, I didn't know how to write. And I remember in Old Testament, which was one of the hardest courses I ever had in my life. I mean, I won't go into it, but it was just beyond. I mean, I would literally study 20 to 30 hours a week just on that one course. It was incredibly difficult. And the first exegesis I had to write, which is taking a passage and explaining it and understanding it, and footnoting your sources and so forth. And the proctor, which are PhD students who help the professor, called me in and said, "You don't know how to write." And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, I don't." And he said, "Well, you can't just write 5-word sentences, declarative. You need to share what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and expand it." That's the first time anybody told me. And I started doing very well at that.
Right.
Because I had the aptitude, I didn't understand how.
Right.
Nobody taught me.
Or you weren't able to learn at the time that it was taught.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And I've often thought that, you see these movies or you understand the apprenticeship approach where you take a young boy or a young girl at a certain age and you put them into an environment where they're immersed in it would probably be a better way to teach.
Right.
To where public education came from, if I understand, England had a poor model of it and it transported over here, and because of the revolution they thought, well, everybody should have access to education. So it went away from the apprenticeship system to everybody's in the classroom doing the same thing at the same time.
Right.
And I understand, isn't Melissa having a problem because she has 5 students who are at different levels?
I think every teacher deals with it now that you're given a paper that says this is this.
You can't. We're all different, and we have to. So there's got to be a better system than public education.
Well, so this will get to my final question I want to ask you. What gives you hope about the future? But I want to answer this myself for you because we happen to be on this topic. So recently, Brewer is allowing students to work from home, work remotely, because they noticed that a handful of students have excelled at home. I think for the vast majority, it wasn't that.
Right.
It's not very good, but a few really took off, and it makes me think. So there's a podcast I listen to where the host is he grew up in the Soviet Union until he was like 13. And he said that the Soviet Union system, as soon as you show an aptitude towards something, they're grabbing you out and you're kind of focusing on that field. And he said, you're constantly being accelerated, where he feels that the U.S. system
marginalizes.
Well, you're kind of held back by the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
Yeah. The slowest couple students hold the class back, and my girls complained every year in school. We're doing the same stuff we did last year. It's a nonstop. Where I look at the level they could be at if they had been allowed to progress at their pace, and I'm hopeful that out of this COVID thing, that becomes an option. Now, Brewer has an advanced program in this subject, and maybe my girls from Hamden can take that course load, and maybe they're not working from home in all their classes, because I think that's a mistake. Because I think the social
self-motivation, we're not all,
and the social aspect of school is extremely important.
Extremely.
But you have your thing that you're excelling in. Here's an opportunity to excel, and I could see that actually turning into a thing that gives a lot of help to the students.
I think where the rub comes, as a country, our ideal is everyone has an opportunity.
Right.
the reality is we all have different aptitudes,
And
those two clash.
and equity of outcome is equity of effort needs to also be considered.
And reward.
Right.
And it's true. There are amazing stories of people who come from nothing and excel. But what's the drive? And can we find a balance that is more productive than where we are now in public education? It's abominable what's happening.
Right.
It really is. The teachers are being abused. The students are being abused. It's not. It's got to change.
Yeah. So, what gives you hope about the future? What do you, future generations, your own future? Because I really want this podcast that I'm doing to be. So much of what I see out there is pulling apart and everybody's separating.
My hope is that as I've been a student of history since in ministry, because I love the history, and if you read the Old Testament history, I'm right now I just finished Exodus, and the story is so hopeful, but what a bummer. Aaron fails completely and builds the golden calf, and they forget all the rules that Moses brought from the Lord to them and just blows it. And they're going out, and it says, and it's one of these balances that there's always a blessing and a curse throughout the Bible. And the blessing is, if you're faithful, you will live in a land of milk and honey. However, if you don't do what the Lord says, watch out. And it's always there. Right. It's always a tension throughout. My hope is that the pendulum of history has swung as far as it can go.
Right.
I mean, not to name names, but how far can we go to the left where we actually give money to people who don't work? And expect those who work to pay for it without resentment.
Right.
Talk about a psychological dilemma for society. Hopefully the pendulum's going to come back and not go so far to where, you have because the middle class is destroyed.
Right.
Why work? I can be paid for it.
Right.
I get so frustrated. Here your mother and I, we've worked so hard, and we have insurance, and we do, and they're saying all people are going to be covered, and they don't pay for it, and they have access to the same health that I do, and I've worked all my life to get access to good health, and so something's wrong with our system.
But on that line, it is nice that you're growing up central Chicago in an area where the chances of you getting out and being successful are slim, right? You're in, and that's one thing off the table that they have to worry about. At least
That's a good point.
But I also agree with you that I look at kids that get their parents give them everything, and they just don't respect it. They got their new car and they're beating it up. Because they didn't earn it. They didn't. Where you see the kid that worked at McDonald's for 5 years and can buy this piece of crap, and washes it every day, and parks alone in the parking lot so nobody's going to bump it. There is absolutely value in earning something, and in finding that balance. And I'm with you that things and not. But I would say both political parties have both swung so far out that I'm hopeful that the center has to come at some point. The center
and history
is what
says all the history will.
Right.
Yeah, and there is a lot of negativity out there.
But so much
QAnon and so forth that are distorting things, and But usually in society, truth wins out.
Right.
You know, that people will self-correct. I don't know if the American dream is still capable of surviving in our new world. It did look like for a while the goal was for other nations to become like the United States.
Right.
But I don't think that's anymore.
I think that was a mistake.
Yeah, I think that was a definite mistake. You know, that as if we can make Afghanistan like us.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean,
there was success in Japan.
right.
You know, and
Germany.
But I think I've always felt this way. Leading by example is the best way
Yes.
than telling somebody how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I put a lot of blame on the secret agencies like the CIA and so forth that worked on an ideal, as we've been talking about, that just it's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. Like I'm not. Well, I don't want to get too political, but it's. I am hopeful, like you said, that people are so sick of the. I gotta believe, sick of the negativity, sick of the just
absolutely
having to question everything and not trusting it, and so there's. I believe there's a want and a need for truth, and like I look at, we talked about last night that the news stations, and you. I would love to just watch the news and
without an interpretation of what's going on.
But because it's swung so far out the other way, that there's an opportunity there, and
yeah, I get so frustrated when I hear NBC News hasn't verified this, but
right,
you know, and I'm thinking, what are you saying? You know, you're speculating. That's not what we need.
right.
You know, it's just.
Yeah. But like you said, hoping for the pendulum to swing back the other way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always hope.
So I very much appreciate you doing this with me, Dad. I couldn't have more love for my father.
Thank you. But
you're a great role model. No, this has been fun. I wish it was a little warmer in here. I'm kind of chilled at this point. I probably shouldn't have wore shorts. But thank you very much, Dad.
thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah.
We'll do it again.
Great.